name, and all God's people said, Amen. Thank you for standing. You can be seated. Tonight, I want to preach to you out of Acts chapter 9 and verse 17 on this thought, Brother Saul. Brother Saul. Brother Charles, my remote is not working. This thing is possessed with the devil. Doesn't seem to be cooperating. And so you'll have to help me. I got a lot of verses on there, and so I'll just try to give you a heads up. But I want to talk about Brother Saul tonight, and I hope this will be a help to you. Now, we've just read Acts chapter 9, and what happens in Acts chapter 9 is a moment that changed the world. Brother Derek, I forgot about those notes. Go ahead and pass those out if you don't mind. Raise your hand if you haven't got one. I know no one has one, so everyone's hand should be up. We ran out last week. I hope I printed off enough this week. This is Brother Derek's fault. He was supposed to have reminded me. I didn't see you. I guess y'all have celebrated about the tax bill that got passed. That's a blessing, ain't it? Praise the Lord for that. All right. Everybody good to go now? I think so. All right. Acts chapter 9 has the record of Paul's conversion, or of Saul, his conversion, the day that he met Christ. And this moment, by every sense of the word, changed the course of the planet, and few moments have shaped the world such as this one. Now, the world hangs on the thin thread of moments. A moment, whether brief or long, a moment can change the entire course of a nation, and as we have seen over the past, a moment can change the course of the entire planet. Moments like September 11th, 2001, that was a moment that changed the world. Moments like July 16th, 1945, who knows what that day was? That was the day that the first atomic bomb was detonated, and that changed everything, because now every nation, whether great or small, wants that power because it's the ultimate weapon, and if you can control that power, you can control other nations, and moments like that changed the world. Moments like June 28th, 1914, when Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, and that started World War I. Who remember that story? Moments like, there was a day in June, I think it was, in 1924, and a guy named Adolf Hitler was released from prison. He had thrown this big rebellion and done all this stuff with his Nazis, and was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in jail, and only had to serve like 200 and something days, and then they let him out. And the world regrets every moment after that. He should have stayed in jail and even been executed. But moments can change the world. And a lot of times the moments happen and no one knows they happened until the repercussions are realized later on. And in Acts chapter 9, a moment comes when Saul of Tarsus and Jesus Christ meet face to face. And that moment changed the world. It changed the world. Now, the world hangs on a thin thread of moments. Now, no two beings understand that more than God and Satan. No two beings understand the value of one single moment more than God and Satan. In Luke's account, I believe it's Luke's account of Jesus Christ's temptation. I can't remember which chapter it's in, but it's the same account as Matthew chapter 4, the wilderness temptation. It says that it took place in a moment. Uses the phrase, in a moment. And so God and Satan know very well how valuable each moment is, and they understand the world turns on that. And so for these moments, they both fight. They fight for these moments. Moments in your life, moments in my life, moments in our church, moments in our nation, moments in the entire planet. God and Satan are aware of them, and they fight over them. And just like in the other moments we've just read about, this moment changed the world forever. And what a wonderful event this is. You understand the rest of your Bible would look so much different had Acts chapter 9 not gone the way that it does. Had Saul resisted Christ one more time, had he rebelled and went the other way, instead of yielding to Christ, had he went the other way, how much different the history record would read, and how much different the Bible would look. It would be very, very different. And like all major moments, it could have gone either way, and the world could have gotten either much worse or much better. When Adolf Hitler was released from prison, the world got worse, not better. And had Saul stayed Saul of Tarsus and never been converted, the world would have gotten much worse. And much like the other moments we looked at a minute ago, this moment had an undercurrent that was flowing and building and getting stronger, and maybe it was unseen to the eye to most, but Paul knew it was going, or Saul knew it was going on. God knew it was going on. And certainly, I think the devil knew that it was going on. But after this moment takes place, Saul of Tarsus becomes brother Saul. And it takes place in a place called Damascus. If you look in verse number 2, he was on his way to Damascus. Now, Damascus was the oldest city in the world. It's the ancient city. Abraham was there in Genesis chapter 14, and history says that was the oldest established city in the entire world. Hebrew history claims, I don't know if it's true or not, but Hebrew history claims that that's where Cain killed Abel, was in Damascus. I do know this, that David in 2 Samuel chapter 8 selected Damascus to be a headquarters city, and he built a fort there. In 2 Kings chapter 11, there's a leper. His name is Naaman. He's a Syrian general, and he goes down to the prophet, and the prophet says, go down to Jordan and dip 7 times, and your flesh will be like new. And he pitched a little hissy fit and got very upset, and he said that the waters of Damascus, the rivers Abana and Pharpar, are better than all the rivers in Israel. All the water in Israel is nothing like the rivers of Damascus. It's a beautiful place. Muhammad, I know we don't regard anything Muhammad has ever said, but he did say as he was on his way into Damascus that a man can only have one paradise on the earth, and that was his paradise. So he turned around and walked away from it as to not be distracted from his mission. But nonetheless, Damascus was a beautiful place. It was a paradise-like city. It was a massive, massive city with a population that was just staggering. It was a powerful place. Later on, it did become a world power. The Islamic State made that their headquarters for quite some time. And it was a very great city. And that's where Paul or Saul was on his way to. And so in it, you've got a very great city, but you've also got Saul of Tarsus, who by all accounts was a very great sinner. He said of himself he was the chiefest of sinners, and he was the leader against Christianity or against his faith. Philippians chapter 3, Brother Charles on the screen. Philippians chapter 3, this is Paul's own account of himself, that he was circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, and Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law of Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. He was kind of the best of the best. Go to the next one, brother. Galatians chapter 1. Paul says, "Ye have heard of my conversation in time past in the Jews' religion, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God." How that beyond measure. Those are his words of his own persecution he brought against the church, and you couldn't even measure it. He said, and I wasted it. What strong language. He said, and profited in the Jews' religion above many my equals in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. No one was more adamantly against the cause of Christ and the faith of these believers than Paul was. Go to 1 Timothy chapter 1, brother. He said of his own self, who before was a blasphemer and a persecutor and injurious, but I obtained mercy because I did it ignorantly and unbelief. He goes on in just another 2 verses to say that he was the chiefest of sinners. Now, you can arguably say that he might have been the worst sinner that ever lived. You can go ahead to the next screen there, brother. He might have been the worst sinner that ever lived. He certainly brought as much ill towards the people of God that he could. So we've got a really great city, and we've got a really great sinner, but someone greater than the greatest city is about to walk into this story. Someone older than the oldest town is about to walk into this story. Someone cleaner than the cleanest rivers in the entire world, someone with more authority than all the world powers combined, is about to show up in Acts chapter 9. One that is above the chiefest of sinners, one that is brighter than the noonday sun, one that is smarter than every lawyer, professor, prophet has ever been. Yes, Jesus Christ, the I am Jesus from verse number 5, is about to walk into this scene and change everything. This moment in Acts 9, he's about to change it. The conversion of Saul of Tarsus to Brother Saul. Now that's how we greet each other, is it not? Brother Doug, Brother Frank, Brother Phil, Brother William. We give us that title of endearment, that title of respect, Brother so-and-so. And that's what Saul of Tarsus, injurious. Above many mine equals, he was zealous and adamant against killing and stomping out the religion of the Christians. He turned into Brother Saul. Now, this is no ordinary conversion. I mean, Jesus himself physically showed up for this one. This one's a big deal. All right, Jesus didn't show up on yours. I'm sorry, he didn't show up on mine either. I mean, he might have been there in spirit, but he wasn't there in presence like he was for Saul. And Jesus shows up on this one. There were outward signs. He's stricken with blindness. There's light that just is unexplainable. There are miracles done. There are visions given. And that didn't happen when I got saved. It didn't happen when you got saved. It's not going to happen when the next guy gets saved. This is an extraordinary salvation conversion. 3 times in the Bible, his salvation testimony is recorded. 3 times by itself just in Acts, and then he records it 2 more times in the epistle. Because this salvation, though it was just as valid as all the other people's salvation, this one changed the world. It changed the world. Now this moment that we've got here, this moment, we've got a great city, we've got a really great sinner, and then we've got a really great God getting into it, and Jesus is about to step in and change it. Now I want you to see several things about this conversion that I hope will help us. And really, I'm going to give you a very long introduction, and then I've got one point at the end that I hope will really help our church. And I welcome the sneers and the grins. I'm used to it by now. But I want you to see tonight in his conversion, number one, I want you to see a great wrath. A great wrath. In verse number 1, and Saul, yet breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, went unto the high priest. Listen, he's breathing out threatenings. Well, that's not a big deal. We can do that on Facebook. But and slaughter. Okay, and slaughter. All right, Brother Derek has recently got into the hog business, and they take hogs and cows and things to the slaughterhouse. You know what happens at a slaughterhouse? Things are cut to pieces. Things are killed and cut to pieces. And Saul is breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord, like decapitation, like feeding to hungry lions and bears, filthy, just vicious, almost barbaric stuff. All right, this is a man whose wrath is out of control. He's like on a rampage. I want you to notice, first it was a consuming wrath. It was a consuming wrath. He's breathing out threatenings and slaughters against the disciples of the Lord. Breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the disciples of the Lord. He is completely and totally consumed. In this moment, he's traveling over 200 miles to go hunt down some believers. Now in Acts 7, when Stephen is killed, a persecution arises. And in Acts chapter number 8, Saul, he's wreaking havoc of the church, going from house to house, arresting people, taking them into prison, killing or having some of them killed. But that was in Jerusalem. Well, now he is so consumed with stopping this faith and stopping this business of preaching about Jesus. He is so consumed with it that now he's traveling up to 200 miles to go hunt down more believers. Now, Damascus was such a populated city, and there were so many Jews there. There was already synagogues there, and so he knew there had to be some believers that had gotten there, and so he had to go hunt them down. He had to make sure that he put this to a stop, this fight against the faith of Jesus Christ. Now, this would have been his life's work. Now, had he been successful in stopping the Christian faith, there would have been books written about him. He probably would have written at least a dozen books himself had he been successful. I mean, people would have studied him. Doctrines would bear his name. I mean, they might have even made a movie about him had he been successful in stopping this Christian faith. This was his life's ambition up to this point. He was completely consumed with it. He was breathing out threatenings. The idea of the wording there is that it's just that's his person. That's all he is. He eats, sleeps, and breathes stopping Christianity. It was a consuming wrath. It was also a collective wrath. In verse number 1, he went to the high priest, and in verse 2, desired of him letters to Damascus to the synagogues, and if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. And so, though Saul was the pioneer of this persecution, the face of it, or the poster child of it, if you will, he was not alone. He went to the high priest. Why? Because they agreed with him, and they were on his side. And whatever he said they needed to do, they were going to do it, and they were going to give him the authority to do so. The high priest, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees, the Herodians, all of them were all in the same lot against the Christian faith. It was a collective wrath. He was not the only one. But I want you to notice thirdly that it was a concentrated wrath. A concentrated wrath. He desired, in verse number 2, letters to Damascus, to the synagogues. So he wants the high priest there in Jerusalem to send letters to the Damascus in synagogue, or to the synagogue in Damascus. He wants him to send letters there so that when Saul gets there, he'll have the complete authority to hunt down anybody that's there and arrest them. And so he wants them to send letters to Damascus, to the synagogue, that if he found any of this way, whether they were men or women, he might bring them bound unto Jerusalem. And so, blind to gender and blind to mercy, Saul was laser focused on these believers. He didn't care if you were a man, if you were a woman, if you were young, if you were old. He has his M.O., and he is looking for these believers. And he wants them to be punished. He is concentrated, he has laser focus, and he's looking for any of this way. That's what verse number 2 says. He's looking for any of this way. Now, that's important because in this story we don't just see a great wrath, but we also see, number 2, a great way. We see a great way. And so in verse number 2, when he goes into Damascus, he's not looking for any in the synagogue or any in this building. These believers didn't have that sort of freedom like you and I have. They were not welcome in the synagogues yet, not with Saul on the loose. The letters to the synagogues made the announcement that Saul was coming. If you notice down in verse number 13, when Ananias responds to the Lord, he said, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he hath done to thy saints at Jerusalem, and here he hath authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on thy name. And so Saul wasn't there yet. He didn't actually get all the way in. He was apprehended by Jesus before he got there, but word had already gotten to Damascus, to the synagogues, and so it was like an announcement that Saul was coming to clean house, so to speak, and arrest all these people. And so when Saul got there, the believers, they were not welcome into a building like you and I would be, and how we gather on a set time each week, multiple times a week, and we've got a sign out front, and everyone knows exactly what we are and who we are, and if they see you coming in here, they know exactly what you are and what you believe, what you stand for, and what you're probably against by coming into this building. But the believers didn't have that option. They could not just go into a dedicated building and enjoy the presence of other believers and worship the Lord. They didn't have that presence or that freedom. And so how is Saul going to be able to find these people? These believers Saul was looking for, they wouldn't be identified by a building, but they would be identified by their way. They would be identified by their way. And verse number 2, again, if you mark your Bible, I'd encourage you to mark this, that if you found any of this way. And I just want to say before I go any further that I am of that way. Amen. I am of that way. And what kind of way was it? Well, number 1, it was Christ's way. That way was Christ's way. Now, Jesus was, quote-unquote, gone, but they still followed His way. In Matthew chapter 3 and verse number 3, it's the way of the Lord. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus calls that way the straight way and the narrow way. And it can't be any coincidence that when God comes to Ananias, in verse number 10, He says, I want you to go to the street that's called Straight. And there's where I want you to meet Saul. There can't be a coincidence. But in Matthew 21, Jesus called it the way of righteousness. In Matthew 22, it's called the way of God. And I think everyone knows John 14, I am the way, Jesus Christ said. And so this way that Saul was referring to, this way that these believers were in, it was Christ's way. It was the way that Christ had preached. It was the same way that John the Baptist had preached. It was the way of Christ. But it was also a conforming way. It was a conforming way. Now, this way was identifiable without associations to dedicated buildings. This way was identifiable without associations to dedicated buildings. Saul couldn't go into town and find the local church and go arrest them all. That's what they would do today if they were looking for Christians. They'd just go to the closest church. Saul couldn't do that. But this way was still identifiable even without the association to dedicated buildings. This way shone through at their homes, in the marketplace, at work, in the way that they spoke, in their countenance, and in their entire lives. This way was their entire life, the entire way they acted with their spouse and with their children and with each other and in business. This way permeated their entire day-to-day life, and it was easily identified. Now, I want to ask you tonight, what is Christian in your life except or outside of coming to church? All right, I understand we all look like Christians tonight on Wednesday. We're at church, and that's great. I'm glad you're here. I wish everyone else was, but I'm glad that we're all here tonight. But what will be Christian about you tomorrow and Friday? What will be Christian about you at the family get-together this weekend? What will be Christian about you at the New Year's get-together next weekend? What is Christ like? What is like Jesus? What is that way in your life outside of your association with this building? I want you to think about that. And if Saul of Tarsus was coming in looking for disciples of the Lord, would he think you were one of them? If he came on a Thursday, do you think he'd find any in Rockmart? I mean, if he came on a Sunday, he's going to have a heyday, because everyone's going to be in church on a Sunday. But if he comes on Monday, he's not going to find nowhere near as many disciples as he would probably expect to find. What is Christ like about your life outside of your association to this building? If we walked into your home, would there be anything that is a red flag that a Christian lives here? Would there be anything in your car that identifies that this person who owns this vehicle is a Christian and they like Jesus? Now, the Bible on the back dash thing that is baked in the sun and ruined, that doesn't count, okay? Because everybody knows how long it's been there. Don't use that one. If they turned on your radio or whatever. Now, I cannot help but think that as Saul is on this hunt for Christians, as he's going through town, I cannot help but think that Stephen's countenance, as Stephen died begging forgiveness for everybody, I cannot help but think that his countenance was burned into Saul's memory, and he could recognize it in someone else. He could recognize that in other people. And he was looking for people, not in a building, but that lived as Christ. And is your life that way? A little bit of application for us tonight is your life that way? And so in this moment, we've got a great wrath. We've also got a great way. And this is an earth-changing moment. It'll change the rest of the course of history. We've got Saul of Tarsus on his way to apprehend more Christians, but God's about to step in, and he's going to change the moment. Well, I'm always interested on how God does things. How about you? I'm interested in God has identified a linchpin, if you will, or he has identified that if he gets involved in this moment, and if he wins this moment, it's going to change the course of history. So how is God going to change history? How is God going to change the world? I mean, he's already sent Jesus. He can't do that again. How will he change the world? So Jesus steps in and he gets involved. And number 3, we see a great welcome. A great welcome. Jesus steps into Saul of Tarsus' life, and what you would expect, maybe he just sets him on fire right there. As an example to everyone else that's against Christianity, he's going to just bring the heat and torch him right there in front of everybody. and everyone will know. If you mess with these Christians, God will come himself and burn you alive. Now that would have probably had some type of impact, I would think. I mean, he does strike Herod down in chapter 12, and that kind of spreads word around. He struck Ananias and Sapphira down, and everybody got afraid. And so maybe that's what he will do. Certainly he had the right to do so. But when Christ shows up, he doesn't burn him. He doesn't send him straight to hell so the church can have peace. What he does was he welcomes him into his own forgiveness. And I want you to see first, it's a welcome from Christ. A welcome from Christ. One of the things that is so astounding about Saul of Tarsus becoming Brother Saul was that no other Christian was involved. No one chased him down. No apostle preached to him. Nobody gave him a gospel tract. Nobody invited him to come to their service in their basement. Nobody was actively trying to reach Saul. The only person who wanted Saul of Tarsus was Jesus. That's the only person that wanted Saul was Jesus. And what a marvelous thing that Jesus Christ was willing to go and try to win somebody to himself that no one else would have or everyone else was afraid of. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, Brother Charles, Deuteronomy 28, the Lord, this is a verse from the Old Testament, the Lord shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart. And thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways. Go to the next verse, brother. In Acts 22, Paul's giving his testimony, and he says, it came to pass that as I made my journey and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon, suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And Saul of Tarsus, a man who has the Pentateuch committed to memory, finds himself right smack dab in the middle of an Old Testament prophecy, and the only way out was Jesus Christ. He finds himself in the middle of a prophecy that he knows does not end well, and that God was angry with Israel, and he finds himself sitting in the same spot, a representation of Israel. They don't want Jesus, they don't want their Messiah, and God's not happy with it, and he's been stricken with blindness at noonday. He finds himself right in the middle of a prophecy, and Jesus is the only way out. Turn to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is his own, again, his own account. He said, at last of all, he was seen of me, talking about Jesus Christ, as one born out of due time. For I am the least of the apostles, and that am not meet to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. Jesus Christ steps into Saul's life on the road to Damascus at noonday, and he gives him a welcome into his forgiveness and into his own family. And what a wonderful thing, amen? So a welcome from Christ. Let me just say this, I'm glad that Christ welcomed me too. I may not have been as bad as Saul, but I still deserve to go to hell. Amen. Had it not been for the grace of Jesus Christ. So a welcome from Christ, but also a welcome with conviction. A welcome with conviction. Now, if you enjoyed it up to this point, you may not enjoy this point, and most of America will not enjoy this point, but it is a Bible point, so therefore it is a good point. Now, Jesus did not show up and say to Saul how much he loved him. Now, we know that Jesus did love Saul, else he wouldn't be there. But he did not show up saying, Saul, Saul, I love you so much. Saul, Saul, God is love. Saul, Saul, I want to forgive you. No, that's not what he said. The very first thing that Jesus said to Saul was, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? I don't think Jesus had his kid gloves on when he said that. I think he said it, why persecutest thou me? And the very first thing that Jesus did when he got to Saul was he addressed his sin. Now, Saul's salvation is very different from yours and I's because of the way this all happened. It didn't happen the way that it happened with us. But it is still similar in the aspect that sin was the first thing that Jesus dealt with. And in order for anyone to come into the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, there has to be an addressing of sin. Jesus proved that in John chapter number 4 when he dealt with a woman at the well. Before he ever gave her the water that he was talking of, he said, hey, go get your husband. And y'all know the rest of the story. She said, I don't have a husband. He said, yeah, I know, you got 5. You've had 5, and the guy you with now ain't your husband. You know what he was doing? He was addressing her sin. He was convicting her of sin. And Jesus, when he showed up on the road to Damascus, he did show up with a welcome, but it was also a welcome with conviction. It was not just a, look, I love you as a sinner, but I don't care if you stay a sinner or not. It was not that type of address. It was not that type of welcome. It was not a come as you are, leave as you were, and just acknowledge me and everything's going to be hunky-dory. He was accepted, but he also changed. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and verse number 17 says, Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. Guess who said that? Paul, the new creature, because he was changed. Even Saul's name changed. And it was a great welcome, and Christ still welcomes sinners to come into his forgiveness, but there is also a conviction that comes with that welcome. There is a conviction that comes with that welcome. I follow it's a global thing on Twitter, and it's all about trying to help the church be more sharp and a little more professional, things like that. And it said that a statistic survey was done, and 87% of millennials viewed every Christian as judgmental. And then it says something about trying to fix that it's our brand, we got to clean it up and make everyone think we're not so judgmental. Well, for crying out loud, how are you supposed to preach Jesus Christ died for your sins without being judgmental? How are you supposed to tell someone, all right, if you die without Jesus, if you die like you are, even though you're a perfect millennial, you'll go to hell? How are you supposed to do that? And that's what America's trying to do. They're trying to win Jesus to Christ without actually saving them. They're trying to make them accept Him without them ever having to acknowledge that they're lost, acknowledge that they need a Savior, acknowledge that they should go to hell. They're trying to skirt that and dodge that, and we cannot do that. We cannot do that. Jesus Christ is winning Saul to himself, and the first thing that he does was he addresses the sin. Now, I'm not saying you got to go out and point out everyone's sins, but it is something we must not act like don't exist. Because you can't get saved without acknowledging the sin problem. And so there was a welcome from Christ, but a welcome with conviction. But I want you to see this third welcome in verse number 10. Verse number 10. If you're there, say amen. Talking about a great welcome. There was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias. And to him said the Lord in a vision, Ananias, and he said, Behold, I am here, Lord. And the Lord said unto him, Arise, and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he prayeth. Now, some of the verses that we skipped was Saul in verse number 6 responds to Jesus, and he says, Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? And the Lord said unto him, Arise, go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do. And so Saul has humbled himself before Christ. He is stricken with blindness, and the men that were with him led him into Damascus. And now he is at a house of a man named Judas. And I'm pretty sure that those men left him there because he probably began speaking about Jesus and about the faith and undoing everything that he's been doing. And them men probably left him in the hands of a man named Judas. And so God comes to a man named Ananias, a disciple, a believer, someone that Saul would have killed had he had the chance. He comes to Ananias and says to go to this house and meet Saul, for he's praying. Verse number 12, we'll pick it up there. He has seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hand on him that he might receive his sight. And then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he hath done to thy saints at Jerusalem. And here he hath authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on thy name. And so Ananias says, Lord, that's really not a good idea. That's a really bad man. We don't really need to have him here. He's probably undercover. It's probably a scam. He's just going to sneak in and then kill us all. And this is probably not a good idea. And remember what I've told you that Brother Williams used to say all the time. It's probably not a good idea to argue with God because he's normally right. And so Ananias has a rebuttal against what Jesus is saying. In verse number 15, the Lord said unto him, Go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And here it is in verse number 17, we see a great welcome from a Christian. A great welcome from a Christian. And Ananias went his way and entered into the house, and putting his hands on him said, Brother Saul, Brother Saul, The Lord, even Jesus, that appeared unto thee in the way as thou camest, hath sent me, that thou mightest receive thy sight and be filled with the Holy Ghost. I mean, sure, everybody loves the Apostle Paul, but Ananias went and embraced Brother Saul. I mean, the terrorist, for lack of a better word. The guy that was slaughtering people and having people slaughtered, still in his old name, still carrying his old reputation, his old mentality. You understand that Saul of Tarsus did not magically get saved and then turn into this great, awesome, profound Christian that traveled the world and changed history. There was a lengthy process. Galatians chapter 1, he mentions a 14-year process. 14-year process of his training and learning. And Saul of Tarsus, if he walked into a Baptist church with his reputation, most would say, you probably should go down the road. We don't really want you here. But Ananias, he welcomed Brother Saul. Brother Saul. Before he ever had a chance to become the great apostle, before he ever had a chance to be the greatest preacher, before he ever had a chance to write all the doctrines about Jesus Christ that we have, before he wrote any of that, before he ever comforted the believers with the doctrines of the rapture, before he did any of those things, Ananias accepted and embraced Brother Saul and even gave him that name, Brother Saul. Look at the common ground that he brings up. He said, the Lord, even Jesus, that appeared unto thee, hath sent me. So the common ground that we see between Ananias and Brother Saul is the same Jesus that Ananias believed, the same Jesus that forgave Ananias is the same Jesus that forgave Saul, the same Jesus that called Ananias is the same Jesus that's called Saul of Tarsus. And who is Ananias to say that Jesus can't save him? And many times in our churches, good churches, even like ours, a Saul gets conviction or under conviction, or he might even get saved, might even walk into our doors. But we don't want much to do with him until he's already a Paul. In Galatians 1, Paul mentions the process that he went through. Acts 9, Jesus mentions the potential that Saul was. In verse 15, he says, he is a chosen vessel unto me to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. So this guy, Saul of Tarsus, he's going to be a preacher to the Gentiles, he's going to be a preacher to kings, and he's going to be a preacher to all Israel. I mean, he's going to have the greatest ministry, Ananias, you've ever heard of. That's potential. That's potential. And then Paul writes about his process. And so for every potential to become the actual product, there has to be a process. There has to be a process. I don't think anyone probably understands that more than some guys that like to restore cars. They can go to a junkyard and find an old 60-something Mustang or Chevelle or Camaro, and when I'm looking at it, I see a bucket of rust, I see a whole bunch of problems, and I don't want nothing to do with it. And all they see is, oh man, that's going to be great. So what they do? They buy it. And then they go take out a loan, and they get all this money, and they build a garage, and they almost like lay their children and their marriage on the line to restore this old crazy car, and they work on it, and they sand it, and they paint it, and they turn wrenches, and they bust knuckles, and they do this, and they do that, and it takes a long time, but eventually one day, that thing drives out of the garage looking like a brand new car because somebody was not afraid of the process because they knew what kind of product they could create. Now, someone like me, my process is show me where to sign my name and give me the keys. That's my kind of process. I'm not about rust and wrenches, and that's not me. And I don't know how to do all that stuff. Now, some guys do. That's their thing. They like to restore cars, and they can look at a whole thing and they see the potential. Now, Saul of Tarsus in verse 15, God said he's got potential. He's going to be able to be all of this, but before he can be that, become the product, he's got to go through the process. And it took an Ananias to go ahead and accept the potential before the process ever even got started. And if any church is ever going to grow, I know everybody wants the product. They want it reaching the Gentiles, the kings, the Israel. They want it reaching everywhere it can reach. They want it growing. They want it boom. They want to have it. but it takes a process. And sadly, many people are not like Ananias. Look, how about this? In verse number 10, when the Lord comes to Ananias, he says, there's a man named Saul in the house of Judas. He said, go talk to him. Here's why. In verse number 12, are you looking at it? Say amen. He hath seen a vision, a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hand on him that he might receive his sight. He said, I've already told him that you're coming. Because I know that if I come to you, you're going to rebuttal, but you're going to believe me and you're going to go anyway. I've already told him. Jesus went ahead and told Saul of Tarsus anyway, because he had that much confidence in Ananias that even against his own judgment, he would trust God and embrace Brother Saul before he's Apostle Paul. Now, I say that to say this. I wonder if he can trust us. I wonder if he knows that even against our carnal judgment, we'll still trust Christ to embrace the Brother Sauls instead of just looking for the Apostle Pauls. We can't fear the process. You know why we don't like the process? Because it takes a long time. You know why I don't like restoring cars? Because it takes too much time, and I ain't got time for that. Nobody got time for that. And sadly, sometimes when it comes to the things of God, ain't nobody got time for that. Yes, we want an Apostle Paul. Give us that. But if you send us some Brother Saul, we're not going to go for that. Brother Saul. A great welcome by Christ, indeed, but it was then echoed by a great welcome from Ananias. Barnabas is given credit for bringing Saul in, and he does do that. But before Barnabas, there was an Ananias that Jesus knew he could trust. My heart's desire for the pastor of this church is that Jesus can trust us with some Sauls. They may not come in here polished. They may not come in here trained. They may not come in here ready to go and knowing exactly what to do and how to handle it. They may not come in here this is fiery, awesome thing. But I hope Jesus can trust us enough to embrace them, love them, and say, Brother Saul, the same Jesus that spoke to you spoke to me. The same Jesus that died for you died for me. That was their common ground. That was what united Ananias and Brother Saul. And may that be us tonight. May that be our heart. May that be how we operate. Amen. Brother Saul. Let's all stand tonight.